It is Fantasy Football Insider on cleveland.com. He is Chris Fedor. I am dan-labbe, and he is here to answer your fantasy football questions. What you need to do is scroll down to the bottom of this post. If you have a cleveland.com account, log in. If you don't, sign up real quick. It's free, and get your fantasy football questions answered as we are on to week 3 of the NFL season.
Yeah.
And Chris, when I got into the office today, one of the first things you showed me was your fantasy football team, one of your 4 fantasy football teams. And on your bench, you had something like suspended, questionable, out. I think a lot of people are logging onto their teams this week and seeing a lot of red letters next to their players.
It was funny because in all of my leagues, the waiver wire went through last night, Dan, and it just exploded.
Yeah.
I mean, normally in a normal waiver wire period, you'll probably have 4, maybe 5 teams going to the wire trying to fill a bye week, trying to take care of an injury. It was 2 rounds, all 12 teams getting involved because that's what's happened here in fantasy football. All the injuries. Think about last week, just in general. You had Roddy White leave the game. Then you had H.A. Green leave the game. You had all these injuries just pile up, and that's going to be a running theme moving forward.
Running backs, like you said, it's a real problem. And let's start with Jamaal Charles.
Yeah.
What's going on with Jamaal Charles owners? What are they doing to try to replace this guy?
Well, this is your yearly reminder, Dan. I send this reminder every single year. I feel like I have to. Always handcuff your guy. And the thing that I would also say is, if you are in a draft, this is for in the future. If you're in a draft and you're in round 10 or 11 or 12, something along those lines, I'm telling you right now, the backup running back to your first running back taken is going to have more value than a 5th wide receiver on your roster or a 6th running back, something along those lines. So even if you have to reach 1 round in advance just because you want to cuff your main guy, you have to do that. So if you're a Jamaal Charles owner, Dan, the thing that everybody wants to do is go to the waiver wire and try and get Knile Davis. Well, chances are he's already been swooped up or he's not going to be available. So now you're in a little bit of hurt, and now you're looking at some other options. Maybe Bobby Rainey from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers is available. Maybe Donald Brown, who's going to be the replacement for Ryan Matthews, is going to be available. But if you're a Jamaal Charles owner and you handcuffed with Knile Davis, you're going to be just fine because he's going to get the opportunities. He's not going to come off the field. He'll get the red zone touches. He'll get the touches between the 20s. He'll catch the ball out of the backfield. He punched in 2 short touchdowns last week. He's not as talented as Jamaal Charles. Everybody understands that. But Dan, when it comes to fantasy football, so much is about opportunity. And now Knile Davis is all the Chiefs have to run the ball.
All right, let's go ahead and get to a question in our comments from Andrew OH17. He's asking if he should trade Jamaal Charles or wait out the injury and hope he stays healthy the rest of the year. And he's asking because he's got Arian Foster and he's got Giovanni Bernard.
I mean, I think there are certain guys in fantasy football, Dan, that are just untouchable. You don't trade them. And Jamaal Charles is in that category, even though he is dealing with this high ankle sprain, and those are very, very tricky injuries. You don't trade Jamaal Charles. You don't trade LaShawn McCoy. You probably don't trade Peyton Manning, Jimmy Graham, Calvin Johnson. Guys like that, you used a top 5 pick on Jamaal Charles because you wanted him to be the foundation of your fantasy football team. Despite his injury, I think you have to hang on to him.
Some of us used the number 1 overall pick.
Did you get Knile Davis, by the way?
No comment.
So
this advice would have been useful 3 weeks ago.
I host the show with you. I say it all the time to you, Dan, and yet you didn't listen to my advice.
I went rogue.
Yeah, thanks.
I guess. All right. Now there's a lot of, I know.
That's what you get, karma.
And I'm coming off a loss.
Karma.
All right, there's a lot of running backs by committee out there. Here in Cleveland, there's a running backs by committee a little bit, but what is going on in Indianapolis?
I don't think it's necessarily that big of a committee. A lot of people think it is because Trent Richardson, Dan, he usually starts the game. He's usually the first running back. I have no idea either. They traded a first-round pick, though, for him, so they're trying to get as much out of him as possible. But the reality is, Ahmad Bradshaw, so far in 2 games, he's touched the ball, or he's played in 90 plays. 90 plays for Ahmad Bradshaw, 60 for Trent Richardson. They understand that the more talented guy is Ahmad Bradshaw. You just saw that the other night against Philadelphia. Ahmad Bradshaw, he had the touchdowns, he had the catches, He had the better runs. Trent Richardson is a guy that is still going to be in the mix. Everybody understands that. They're not just going to give up on him completely. But the truth is, if you're picking between the two guys, you want Ahmad Bradshaw because he's more talented and because he's getting those goal line opportunities.
Look at this guy, Andrew O.H. He replies to his own comment that he got Knile Davis. So see, he took your advice.
Attaboy.
And he is in much better shape than I am right
And you know what? I'll say this. Knile Davis this week, to me, he is one of the top 10 running backs in fantasy football.
Okay. What other running backs
And
are
you don't have him.
I know, I don't. What other running backs are you looking at?
I love Alfred Morris this week.
I have him.
Okay.
Yeah, I
there
got
you go. Coming off a game where he had 2 touchdowns. Look, they don't have Robert Griffin III, so they don't have that extra element running the ball, so they're going to have to focus more on Alfred Morris, him being more of the running game. And not to mention, look, he's playing the same defense that allowed Trent Richardson to go for a career high in yards as an Indianapolis Colt. If Trent Richardson can run the football against the Philadelphia Eagles, I'm quite certain Alfred Morris, who has more talent than T-Rich, will be able to run the ball as well. I think it's a great matchup. He's one of my top starts of the week.
Any other running backs that maybe aren't starters, guys, third down backs, whatever they are, fill-in backs at the moment? Any other backs that you're kind of watching?
Well, you got to watch Donald Brown, and if your waiver wire hasn't happened for one reason or another, or people are sleeping on the waivers, or you're in a 10-team league maybe, Donald Brown is somebody that you have to go out and get. Look, he performed really well this past year in Indianapolis before getting to San Diego. Came in the offseason, and he's kind of in this committee to start because of Ryan Matthews, because of Danny Woodhead, and because of him. So now you've got Matthews out of the equation because he sprained his knee. Danny Woodhead is more of a third down back, more of somebody who's going to catch the ball out of the backfield, Dan. So Donald Brown, I think, is going to get the first crack to be the foundation back for the San Diego Chargers. Talented guy, former first-round pick, had a good season last year in Indianapolis. So if Donald Brown is still out there on waivers, I think you certainly want to go out and get him because he's going to get more of the opportunities in San Diego, I think, than Danny Woodhead. Look, they're still going to pass the ball. They still have Keenan Allen, Antonio Gates coming off a great game, Phillip Rivers, but Brown can catch the ball out of the backfield as well. I think he's got a lot of value moving forward.
Are you worried about a guy like A.J. Green? He's going to try and play this Sunday, but he's hurt. Does that concern you? Or is he a guy that you keep in your lineup no matter what?
He's a guy that you want to keep in your lineup no matter what, as long as he's playing, Dan. That's the thing. And I'm not necessarily concerned about the injury lingering either, because just like the Cleveland Browns, the Cincinnati Bengals have that bye week in week 4. So I think what Cincinnati's looking for is an opportunity to get off to a 3-0 start, then go to the bye week, use that extra time to get A.J. Green rested, get him healthy again. It was impressive to me that the Cincinnati Bengals were able to move the ball as effectively offensively as they did last week against Atlanta without A.J. Green, their number 1 target. But it just goes to show that Hugh Jackson, the new offensive coordinator, has a different approach now offensively. And it goes back to something you and I talked about on the first show. They want to run the ball in Cincinnati. So it has increased the value of Gio Bernard. It has increased the value of Jeremy Hill. And it's kind of lessened the value to some degree of a guy like Mohamed Sanu, who's been a hot waiver wire pick this week.
All right, there's a couple of guys in here who have a bunch of questions for you, both of them asking about Tony Romo, so let's start there. Finkel is Einhorn, great name by the way. He says Romo or Kaepernick this week?
I like Colin Kaepernick. I have the same exact decision in my league, and I'm going with Colin Kaepernick. First of all, he's been the better quarterback in the first 2 weeks if you look at the point totals for both those guys. Second of all, it seems like Dallas is starting to try and lean more towards that running game with DeMarco Murray as opposed to just huck-a-chuck with Tony Romo in the past. And DeMarco Murray is somebody who's been terrific in the first 2 weeks. And I think the other thing that you have to look at is just the matchup. It's against St. Louis. In the past, Dallas has had a problem protecting Tony Romo. He's somebody who doesn't like to get hit. No quarterback likes to get hit, but when you're coming off a back injury, you certainly don't want that to happen. The strength of St. Louis is that front 7, more importantly, the front 4, which can get a lot of pressure on Tony Romo. So I'd go more towards Colin Kaepernick. It's not a great matchup against Arizona. Arizona does have a really, really good defense, But Kaepernick, to me, in the first 2 weeks, has been better than Tony Romo. So in my league, I'm going with Cap.
Okay, what if your decision, like Die Hard Brown 1, is between Romo and Foles?
I'm going to go with Nick Foles here. He's playing against Washington. He's gotten off to a slow start in the first half against Jacksonville. Slow start in the first half against Indianapolis, but he picked it up in the second half. And I think the one thing that you saw on Monday Night Football, Nick Foles still has a ton of weapons. He doesn't have to throw the ball very far. He just needs to get the ball to Shady McCoy and Darren Sproles and Jeremy Maclin and Riley Cooper, and they can make the plays for him. So, again, I'm going to go with Nick Foles playing against Washington here as opposed to Tony Romo.
There's a couple of guys that have questions about Matt Asiata. We'll go with Die Hard Brown fan. He's looking at Ahmad Bradshaw, and Finkel's Einhorn is wondering if you should go with Knile Davis.
Okay. If the decision is between Asiata and Davis, I want Davis all day long. I think Kansas City is going to be able to run the football first and foremost. I think they're going to try and run the football. He's not just going to go to, let's give the ball to Alex Smith and see what he can do offensively. That's not going to happen. Knile Davis is somebody who's going to get the opportunities. I'm looking for 20 to 25 carries probably for him against Miami. Maybe he gets a touchdown or two. Asiata is an interesting guy because he's going to be the one that takes over that running back role with Adrian Peterson, his future cloudy. There's a hidden secret here about Matt Asiata.
Oh.
He's not very good. So we're talking about somebody, Dan, who in 2 starts last year. Now, he was one of the guys, LaShawn McCoy being the other one, who rushed for 100 yards against the Detroit Lions last year. But in his game before that, he had 3 touchdowns, and everybody loved that he had those 3 touchdowns in that game last year. But he got it on 30 carries. He went 30 carries for 50 yards or something like that. Putting up numbers that would make Trent Richardson jealous. But he's going to get the opportunity. So if you have Asiata, you're probably in a pinch. You probably don't have too many options to turn in the running game. I think he's a flex play, borderline running back 2. But again, to me, Knile Davis is a running back 1. You want him in your lineup. If it's Asiata against Ahmad Bradshaw, I'm going to go with Bradshaw because I think he's the more talented guy.
Okay, moving to receivers. Again, Die Hard Brown 1, DeSean Jackson or Brian Quick?
Brian Quick is very, very interesting. I recommend everybody that has an open spot at wide receiver, somebody that's dealing with a Josh Gordon suspension, dealing with A.J. Green's injury. Maybe you have some questions about what Eric Decker is going to do on Monday night because he's dealing with a hamstring. Go out, get Brian Quick. Not a lot of people realize it, Dan, but he is the #1 target in St. Louis. Now, St. Louis is a running team. That's what they try and do. They have Austin Davis, their 3rd-string quarterback, at quarterback. But Quick has gotten opportunity after opportunity after opportunity in St. Louis this year. He's a former 2nd-round pick, so he's somebody that they're high on. He has gotten, so far to this point, 18 targets in 2 games, 9 each game. He's caught 7 of those, so he's making those targets happen. 7 catches for a wide receiver that can be found on the waiver wire. That's not always something that's easy to find. So Quick is somebody that I like moving forward, but in this particular scenario, Dan, I'm going to go with DeSean Jackson. He's playing against his former team. He is motivated to kick the crap out of Chip Kelly in Philadelphia.
All right, back to Finkel's Einhorn. Reggie Bush or Frank Gore?
Is it PPR? Do you know?
I have no idea. He's not saying.
Oh, man.
But he's kind of got the Bush or Gore thing going. This is kind of like an election question from way back in the day.
All right, well, I wish I knew if it was PPR. I usually try and avoid middling running backs that are playing against the Arizona Cardinals, and that's who Frank Gore is going up against. So in this one, I'm going to go with Reggie Bush.
Okay.
I'll say even if it is standard, I probably would go with Reggie Bush. I like him a whole lot better if it's PPR, but he's playing against the Green Bay Packers, and they've given up a ton of yards, a ton of points this year. New York got up early against them. Green Bay's defense, which was supposed to be improved in the offseason, has not been improved. So Reggie Bush, to me, I think is the guy that you want to go with. Look, if it's Joique Bell against Reggie Bush, I'd probably go with Joique Bell because he's probably the guy that's going to get the opportunities near the goal line. But when you're talking about Gore against Bush, I think they're very, very close. I'm going to go with Bush because here's a case where you want to play the matchup.
All right, so with going into week 3 of the NFL season, we've got 2 weeks of kind of data to work on. What are the defenses that you're looking at right now that you kind of circle and say, all right, this guy's playing this defense. You start somebody no matter who it is if they're going against this defense. Anybody standing out to you there?
Yeah, I would say Oakland.
Well, that's kind of a given, right?
Look, if Houston is a team that had the worst record in the NFL last year. They had the first overall pick. They're in the fourth quarter, Dan, against Oakland, and they are resting their starters. That's how bad that Oakland defense is. Arian Foster, another great day for Houston. Andre Johnson made some things happen. DeAndre Hopkins made some things happen last week. So if you're playing against Oakland, you certainly want to get your starters in there. And I still think, Dan, even though they played better this past week, the Dallas Cowboys is still a defense to me that you want to target. And that means St. Louis is playing against them this week. Zach Stacy should be in lineups, in my opinion. If you're looking for a sneaky play at wide receiver, Brian Quick should certainly be in lineups, even though they played better against Tennessee last week. Eventually, a team with very little talent defensively is going to crumble. And that's what the Dallas Cowboys are. They're a team that has very little talent defensively. Their best linebacker, Sean Lee, out for the year. They're getting Orlando Scandrick back this week. I think he's their best cover corner, but we're talking about somebody who missed the first 2 games because he was suspended. I think it's hard to just throw him in there and say, okay, pick up where you left off last year. Dallas, to me, is still a defense that you want to target. Atlanta's another one, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
Tonight, it's a Thursday night game. It's Tampa Bay against Atlanta. Atlanta's defense is awful.
Yeah, I think we've seen that over the first. There's no question about that.
Yep.
New Orleans defense is pretty
That's
awful.
another one.
Too,
Yeah, target New Orleans. They gave up 568 to the Atlanta Falcons in week 1, and the Browns had a field day last week going for 26 points.
Who are you staying away from? If somebody's kind of a borderline guy, you might start him or sit him, and you see him against a certain defense. Which defenses fall into that category?
2 stand out to me right away. Everybody knows about Seattle, but beyond Seattle, I still think San Francisco is one of those defenses. A lot of questions about San Francisco coming into the year. Are they going to get a pass rush without Aldon Smith? How are they going to be without Navarro Bowman? Well, their defense has still been very, very good so far in the first 2 weeks, even though Jay Cutler picked up his play in the second half against the 49ers. Brandon Marshall, he had those 3 touchdown catches, but he didn't have a bunch of yards. He didn't have a bunch of catches. Alshon Jeffrey, less than 100%, struggled a little bit against that 49ers defense. So I still think that's one that you want to be concerned with. And another one, not a lot of people are talking about this one, the Carolina Panthers, man. The Carolina Panthers defense is for real.
Yeah.
Stay away from that Carolina Panthers defense if you can. Look, if you have a stud, you're going to start your stud no matter what. You're just going to live with the results. But if you're kind of debating, if you've got a running back 2, a flex play, you probably want to avoid Carolina. They're that good.
And another team, we've talked about it already on a couple of shows today, Baltimore Ravens have not given up a touchdown yet.
Not a lot of people understand that. Not a lot of people realize that.
You're probably not starting many Cleveland Browns receivers or backs this week, but keep that in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially because, hey, Dan, a lot of people went out to their waiver wire recently. They picked up Andrew Hawkins. He was a hot name on the waiver wire because they've seen what he's done in the first 2 weeks. They've seen the rapport that Brian Hoyer has with him. Might be a little bit concerned about that going up against the Baltimore Ravens. And if you're trying to be sneaky and go with Isaiah Crowell, because you've seen some things from him in the first 2 weeks, 2 touchdowns in the first game against the Steelers. Obviously, Terrence West has shown that he's probably going to get 15 to 20 carries, maybe 20 to 25. If you're thinking Crowell might get like 10 this weekend against the Baltimore Ravens, he might not do a lot with those. Baltimore's got the number 8 run defense in the NFL.
Real quick before we go, starts and sits.
Well, I already talked about Alfred Morris. He's somebody that I love at running back. I think another one that you want to take advantage of is Stephen Ridley. This goes back, in my opinion, to playing against the Oakland Raiders. And I think we're starting to see a little bit of a trend here with New England, and we're starting to get some clarity on the running back situation. If they're ahead in games, they're going to use Stephen Ridley to churn out yards, kill the clock. If they're behind, they're going to take Stephen Ridley out of the game. He only got 8 carries in the first game against the Miami Dolphins because they were behind for much of that game. They go to Vereen in that case because he can catch the ball out of the backfield, because he operates better in the no-huddle offense. This is a game where I think New England's going to run away and they're going to hide, and that means a lot of carries to kill the clock for Stephen Ridley. Another one tonight, Thursday Night Football. He's been quiet in the first 2 weeks. Vincent Jackson of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He's got 8 catches total in the first 2 games this year. Always hard to rely on a wide receiver when he's relying on Josh McCown to get him the football. But if you go back to his 2 meetings against Atlanta last year, and Atlanta's defense has changed a little bit, but in his 2 games against Atlanta last year, he had 33 targets. 33 targets. He was targeted 22 times in 1 game against Atlanta. There are other weapons there, including Mike Evans, a first-round pick, but he had over 100 yards and at least 1 touchdown in both games against the Falcons, so I think this could be his breakout game.
What are you thinking about, again, going back to this Browns-Ravens matchup? Torrey Smith has been really quiet this season. What do you think about him going up likely against guys who are not named Joe Hayden?
Yeah, I just don't know who that guy is that Joe's going to cover.
Yeah, is he going to cover Smith, or is he going to...
Right.
Which Smith is he going to cover?
Right, and I still think that if you're an opposing defense and you're playing against Baltimore, I still think you're more fearful of Torrey Smith. So because of that, I think Joe Hayden's going to be on Torrey Smith. So I think the guy that you want to take advantage of is Buster Skrine and Justin Gilbert. And I think Steve Smith is going to get that assignment against those guys. So I like Steve Smith Sr. better in the Battle of Smiths for Baltimore. I would sit Torrey Smith until he proves that he's going to be more reliable in this new-look Baltimore offense.
All right, that'll do it for another edition of Fantasy Football Insider. Of course, if you missed any of the show, if you didn't get your questions in, actually, let's do one more.
Yeah, let's do it.
Because it just came in. Where do you rank Wes Welker this week against Seattle? Start him over someone like Reggie Wayne?
I don't think you want to start him over Reggie Wayne, no. I think you want to see how Denver is going to use Wes Welker, first and foremost. And I think you want to see if he's going to be in football shape. I think, obviously, having a guy like Peyton Manning throwing him the ball is going to make him valuable. But Seattle is a defense, first and foremost, that you try to avoid in fantasy football. And I think you just have to look at the hierarchy in Denver. It's probably going to be Demaryius Thomas first, Julius Thomas second, and Wes Welker third until Welker gets more involved, until he gets better in shape, better in rhythm with Peyton Manning after missing the first 2 games. So in this case, I'm going to go with Reggie Wayne. He's the clear-cut #1 option in the passing game for Indianapolis, and he's got a great matchup playing against the Jacksonville Jaguars, another defense that you want to target. They gave up 41 to the Washington Redskins this past week, despite the fact that RG3 left the game on a cart. So exploit that matchup. Go with Reggie Wayne in this one.
All right, this time, for real, that'll do it. If you have any other questions, though, of course, you can tweet them at Chris Fedor, and he will answer them 24/7, right?
Sure, unless it's you. Because you messed up. Because you screwed up with Knile Davis.
We all make mistakes.
And now we're probably using a terrible running back because of that.
Check out cleveland.com/Browns as well. On Sunday morning, we'll have a last-minute advice podcast that we will record right before kickoff of all those Sunday games, so you can get some last-minute fantasy advice from Chris then as well. For Chris Fedor, I am Dan Labbe. We'll talk to you again next week at 12:30.